This video contains descriptions of cannibalism. Viewer discretion is advised. There is something in the woods in northern Michigan, something that sits just outside the reach of firelight, something that makes even experienced men feel watched from between the trees, though no tracks follow them home and no eyes ever catch the light. The people who have called this land home for thousands of years knew what it was. They had a name for it, and that name carried enough weight that saying it aloud, especially in winter, was not something done carelessly. The Wendigo, the word comes from the Ojibwe and Cree languages. It roughly translates to winter spirit or cannibal monster. Across many tribes of the Great Lakes region, the creature existed, and the fact that so many separate peoples across such a vast territory all describe the same thing adds credence to the belief that this is in fact a real creature. This was not a story told to frighten children on dark nights for entertainment. This was a warning carved into the center of an entire worldview. The Ojibwe and their Algonquian relatives traditionally inhabited the forests surrounding the Great Lakes. Michigan's Upper Peninsula and the forests spreading toward Lake Superior were their homelands. Dense, old-growth forest, brutal winters that lasted 6 months or more. Seasons where hunting failed and the cold sat on a community like a stone. The Ojibwe understood the world as not simply physical but populated by spirits, forces whose power could be accessed through dreams, ceremony, and ritual. Everything in the world had a spiritual counterpart, a living presence, and not all of those presences were benevolent. Among the most fearsome was the Wendigo, a cannibal giant that stalked the winter woods in search of human prey. It occupied the darkest end of the spiritual spectrum, not a trickster, not a teacher, not a thing that could not be bargained with. The descriptions are consistent enough across different cultures to be striking. Ojibwe scholar Basil Johnston drew directly from his own cultural tradition when he described it. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation. Its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, its complexion the ash gray of death, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. It gave off a strange, eerie odor of decay and decomposition. Of death and corruption, other accounts add to the picture. The heart of the Wendigo was made of ice. Its eyes burned red or yellow in the dark. Its lips were torn and bleeding, not from violence, but from the creature gnawing them off in the frenzy of its own endless hunger. And the hunger was ceaseless. The Wendigo could eat no other meat besides human flesh. Nothing else could satisfy it, nothing else even registered as food. There is another detail that makes the creature uniquely terrifying. Its body grew as it consumed human flesh, and as its body grew, its hunger grew proportionally, meaning every time it fed, the need became worse. There was no ceiling, no point of satisfaction. The more it consumed, the more desperate it became. The creature was designed by nature to be perpetually starving. It also possessed abilities beyond brute force. Accounts describe exceptional stealth for a creature of its size. Deep knowledge of its territory. Some traditions held that it could control weather, that the worst storms were not accidents of climate but instruments of the hunt, and it did not always appear as a monster you could see coming. In some traditions, the Wendigo could possess a human being. It could enter a living person and begin transforming them from the inside. This version of the legend may be the most unsettling of all. Not an external predator stalking the tree line, something that could take the face of your neighbor, your family member, someone you had known for years. And you would not know until the signs began to show. The Ojibwe and Cree were not merely telling cautionary tales. They believed this possession was literally happening to real people in their communities. They watched for the signs. They had protocols for what to do when the signs appeared. This is where the legend moves from oral tradition into documented history. In psychiatric and anthropological literature, this phenomenon was given a name: Wendigo psychosis. It is classified as a culture-bound syndrome, meaning it manifests within a specific cultural context and is understood through that culture's framework. The symptoms were consistent and documented across multiple communities and time periods. It typically developed in winter, in individuals isolated by heavy snow for extended periods. The early symptoms looked almost mundane. Poor appetite, nausea, vomiting, a growing aversion to food. Then the delusion emerged. The afflicted person began to believe they were transforming into a Wendigo, and simultaneously they began to see the people around them not as people but as meat. The two elements existed together in a nightmarish tension, a craving they could not control, and a horror at that craving that consumed them equally. The community understood what this trajectory led to. The most immediate response was ritual intervention. Traditional healers would attempt to extract the spirit before the transformation completed. In some Cree traditions, treatment involved consumption of fatty animal meat or animal grease. Those treated sometimes vomited what was described as ice, the internal coldness being expelled from the body. If the healing failed, the community faced a decision no community should ever have to face. There is no clearer illustration of how seriously this was taken than the story of a man named Jack Fiddler. Fiddler was an Ojibwe shaman who lived into the early 20th century. He claimed to have defeated 14 Wendigos during his lifetime. Some of these entities were said to have been sent by enemy shamans. Others were members of his own band who had been taken with an incurable, accelerating desire to eat human flesh. In those cases, the family of the afflicted person would sometimes come to Fiddler themselves. They would ask him to kill their loved one before the transformation completed, before someone else became a victim. To Fiddler's community, this was the role of a spiritual protector. It was the hardest part of the work, but it was necessary. In 1907, Canadian authorities arrested Fiddler and his brother Joseph for murder. Jack Fiddler committed suicide before trial. Joseph was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. To the Canadian government, these were homicides. To the Ojibwe community, Fiddler had spent his life doing exactly what a guardian was supposed to do. The collision between those two frameworks says everything about how deep this belief ran and how seriously it was taken by the people who held it. The most documented real-world case connected to Wendigo transformation involves a man named Swift Runner. He was a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta. During the winter of 1878, he and his family were in a period of severe starvation. His eldest son died. Swift Runner was found the following spring in a state of apparent survival. His wife and 5 remaining children were not found at all. Investigators eventually determined what had happened. Swift Runner had killed and consumed his wife and all 5 of his remaining children. What made the case stand apart from straightforward starvation cannibalism was the geography. Emergency food supplies at a Hudson's Bay Company post were only 25 miles away. He had not been trapped with no options. He had chosen not to go. When questioned, Swift Runner said he had been possessed by the spirit of a Wendigo. He was tried and convicted at Fort Saskatchewan in 1879. He confessed openly and showed what witnesses described as genuine remorse. He was hanged that year, the first legal execution in what is now Alberta. The case entered the psychiatric and anthropological record and became one of the central reference points in later discussions of Wendigo psychosis. Whether Swift Runner experienced a psychotic break that his cultural framework interpreted through the Wendigo, or whether something else entirely was happening, is a question that has never been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. The Wendigo legend is most concentrated in the subarctic regions of Canada, but it extends south into the northern United States, and Michigan sits squarely within that range. Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan are all documented Wendigo territory, and for a reason that has nothing to do with state lines. These regions share the same conditions that gave the legend its power: harsh winters. Geographic isolation, communities dependent on hunting in seasons when hunting fails. The precise environment that makes a creature like the Wendigo not just believable but necessary to name. The Ojibwe controlled nearly all of present-day Michigan by the end of the 18th century, the Upper Peninsula in particular, Lake Superior to the north, old-growth forest in every direction. Isolated settlements separated by miles of frozen wilderness. The communities that lived here were not importing a legend from somewhere else. The Wendigo was native to this landscape in every meaningful sense. Specific accounts from Michigan's Upper Peninsula have circulated through both indigenous oral tradition and later settler records. Trappers working the interior forest during winter months reported unease that went beyond normal wilderness anxiety. The sense of being followed by something large, something that moved without sound despite the snow, something that vanished when they turned to look directly at it. One pattern in particular shows up across multiple accounts from different time periods and different parts of the Upper Peninsula. People describe a smell before any visual encounter, something rotten, something that does not belong in clean winter air, the same odor that Basil Johnston described in his traditional account: decay, decomposition. The smell of something dead that is still somehow moving. Hunters all over the region have all contributed accounts over the decades. A figure seen at the edge of the tree line at dusk, larger than a man, wrong proportions. Moving in a way that does not match the way a human body moves, then gone. What is notable about these accounts, taken together, is the consistency in the emotional response. Not just fear, something specific. A sense that whatever was observed was aware of the observer, that there was intelligence behind it, that it had been watching before it was seen. Indigenous communities in Michigan's Upper Peninsula have maintained their traditions around the Wendigo into the present day. The protocols around speaking about it remain. The warnings remain. Elders in Ojibwe communities have been documented consistently discouraging careless discussion of the entity, particularly during winter months. The belief is not historical, it is ongoing. The winter ceremonies that once served as spiritual protection have been maintained in various forms across Michigan's tribal communities. The medicine society traditions of the Ojibwe preserved not just healing practices, but the broader understanding of the spirit world that the Wendigo exists within. Protection was not passive. It required active ritual participation from the community, and there is a layer to the Wendigo that is easy to miss if you approach it only as a monster story. The creature is intimately connected to greed, to excess, and to the breaking of community bonds in pursuit of individual survival at the expense of others. The Wendigo is not just a predator. It is the embodiment of what a human being becomes when they abandon the obligations that hold a community together. In a culture where survival depended on collective cooperation, where sharing food was not a courtesy but a survival mechanism, the person who consumed beyond their need, who hoarded while others starved, who put individual appetite above collective well-being, was already beginning the transformation. The Wendigo was the logical endpoint of that path made physical. This dimension of the legend is what gives it weight beyond simple horror. It is a moral architecture, a way of saying that certain choices do not just harm others. They change what you are, they hollow you out, and once that process begins, the hunger only grows. That idea is not specific to any one culture or time period. The Ojibwe named it and built ritual structures around managing it. But the fear of what a human being becomes when it stops being human is a fear that crosses every border, which is perhaps why the Wendigo has refused to stay contained to academic folklore literature or reservation boundaries. It has pressed outward into the broader culture, appearing in literature, in film, in modern horror, in the accounts of people who have no Ojibwe heritage and no prior knowledge of the legend before they encountered something in the Michigan woods that they could not explain. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan is still largely wilderness. The forests that stretch across its interior are among the densest and least visited in the lower 48 states. Tens of thousands of acres where a person can travel for days without seeing another human being, where the winters are long and brutal, and the silence at night has a weight to it that people raised in cities are not prepared for. If the Wendigo is real, there is no better place for it. And if it is not, if it is a legend born from the pressures of survival, from the psychology of isolation, from the human need to name the darkness that lives at the edge of the fire, then it is still one of the most honest things any culture has ever produced. A mirror held up to what we are capable of becoming, a warning from people who had seen it happen. Subscribe to Paranormal Depths for the strangest and most compelling cases from around the world.